Hi everyone, welcome back to Blood, Guts, and Social Commentary. Today is part 2 of our look at pre-code films. We're going to be looking at non-horror films. We start in 1923 with The Wild Party. Wild girls at college pay more attention to parties than their classes, but when one party girl goes too far at a local bar and gets in trouble, her professor has to rescue her. Gossip linking the two escalates until Stella has to prove she is decent by shielding an innocent girl and winning the respect of the professor. This was Clara Bow's first talkie, so people flocked to the theater to come hear her voice, even though this tends to be represented as kind of a flop. The big issue here was the fact that she kind of had a thing for the professor, which is a problem, just relationship-wise, indecency. At the time period, stuff like that was definitely frowned upon. Moving on to 1931 with Blonde Crazy. Adventures of a cocky con man and his glamorous accomplice. This one is said to have some salacious scenes that were a bit controversial, but I couldn't find more on that. This one's kind of an oddball because some of the symbolism they used at the time wasn't offensive, became offensive and had to be cut. Late in the movie, Jerry shows Cagney his money-making scam for selling swastika charms. When he shows the charm, there's a really abrupt edit. Everybody kind of assumes it was because you saw the charm. The problem with this is the swastika was a good luck charm. Since this was released in 1931, Nazis really didn't come into play until about 2 years later, so that would put us around 1933, maybe 1934. What everybody can kind of gather about this one is it was censored somewhere between 1933 and 1941 because they wanted to take any war-related things out of there. So it's not like the movie and director put that in there to be offensive, because at the time that symbol was pretty innocuous and people knew it and it wasn't actually offensive, but it became offensive due to events I'm sure the director could not have predicted. Also from 1931, Night Nurse. A nurse enlists the help of a petty criminal to foil a sinister plot to murder 2 children. The 2 big issues with this movie, the synopsis already kind of pointed at one, is the fact they even talked about the murder of children. It's just super offensive for the time period and still kind of offensive today. We really haven't gotten past that. Also, there are scenes of Barbara Stanwyck and Joan Blondell flashing their lingerie, which at the time, again, big deal. 1931, A Free Soul. An alcoholic lawyer who successfully defends a notorious gambler on a murder charge objects when his free-spirited daughter becomes romantically involved with him. When this went in front of censors, they demanded that a scene be cut where the female lead lays in bed and asks Clark Gable to put his arms around her, which isn't very subtle as to what was going to happen there. MGM actually ignored this demand and did release it uncut, somehow, I'm guessing right before the code era. Also, with the female lead, she didn't want relationships. There's even a point where she says, men of action are better in action, they don't talk well. So the idea of a female wanting to be with men but not necessarily have relationships with them was very scandalous for the time. Moving on to 1932, Red-Haired Woman. Lillian relentlessly attempts to seduce a married man. This one stars Jean Harlow, in a red wig of course. Specifically, she uses sex to advance her social position. During the course of the movie, she seduces a married man, breaks up his marriage, but still has multiple affairs. That just, at the time, was beyond controversial. Also, the fact that there were some brief nude scenes, but I don't know if that involved Jean Harlow or somebody else. This film was also banned from public showing in Great Britain, but King George X had a personal copy. It didn't pass uncut until 1965, where it was given an A certificate. Moving on to 1933, Babyface. A young woman, sexually exploited all of her life, decides to turn the tables and exploit the hapless men at a big city bank by gleefully sleeping her way to the top. This one was outright banned in a lot of US cities just due to the sexual innuendo, and the plot kind of makes it clear there's a lot of it in this movie. It seems like restoring it was an issue because in 2004 they found a dupe negative of the film in the Library of Congress. They finally were able to screen the uncensored version at London Film Festival in November of 2004, which was roughly 70 years after the film was made. It was finally seen uncensored. 1933, female. Allison Drake, a tough-minded executive of an automobile factory, succeeds in the man's world of business until she meets an independent design engineer. The big issue with this one is Allison Drake will sleep with her employees and anybody else she feels like, and she keeps rejecting marriage proposals. Eventually she gives in and accepts somebody's proposal and does the whole marriage and kids thing. But the beginning of the film, when she's not doing that, is very salacious according to the censors. 1933, Design for Living. A woman cannot decide between two men who love her, and the trio agrees to live together in a platonic friendly relationship. Again, the entire plot on this one was kind of offensive. This one eventually got approved by the Hays office, but was banned by the Legion of Decency, and it was refused certification by the PCA for re-release in 1934, which is when the production code was much more rigorously enforced. Just the overall tone on this one's a problem, because, well, yeah, you may say them living together platonically, but I think most of us are familiar with the show Three's Company and know how much innuendo kind of happens there. 1933, Gold Diggers of 1933. Apt name. A wealthy composer rescues unemployed Broadway performers for his new play. This film came out just a few months before the Hays Code went into effect and was really rigorously enforced. This was also the first film to use alternate footage to pass different state standards. So several different copies of this film existed depending on what area you lived in. This one, again, is just the overall tone. For a very long time in America, actresses, dancers, performers of any kind were very closely associated with prostitutes. So they just weren't held in very high regard. So making a film that centers around them probably was a little salacious for the time. Plus, there is a number called Pettin' in the Park that apparently had to be cut and altered on several different states just to get around censors. There's also a bit of dialogue in the lead-in during the Shadow Waltz where you can clearly hear one of the performers say, "Shit, I can't find my shoe." And you gotta remember, again, time period, that was really offensive language. Think to Gone with the Wind, where Rhett says to Scarlett, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." And the word damn being in that movie was very vulgar and very offensive to a lot of people. And last, 1934, with Tarzan and His Mate. The idyllic life of Tarzan and Jane is challenged by men on safari who come seeking ivory and come seeking Jane as well. This is the only one of the Tarzan movies where Jane wears a two-piece costume. All of the subsequent sequels, she wears a one-piece just due to pressure from censor boards. The big deal with this one, though, is it addressed the obvious sexual tension between Tarzan and Jane, which apparently other films had kind of skirted around. Also, Jane does appear fully nude in a swimming sequence. Her outfit kind of comes off when Tarzan just kind of playfully tosses her into the water. This also did employ the tactic of alternate footage. There's one of her fully nude, there's one of her just topless, and there's one of her in her two-piece outfit. Just, again, to get around censor boards. And that's still a tactic employed today, as I talked about on the MPAA episode. The director of Shadowboxer cut 3 different versions of showing the male lead in different states of arousal, to put it politely, to see which one the MPAA would take. The take of Jane completely nude was apparently lost for a really long time. It wasn't found until the late 1990s, when Turner Entertainment purchased the MGM film library. They've been able to restore it, and it's been put out in all subsequent releases on the direct order of Ted Turner himself. So he apparently was very attached to this movie coming out in its original state and not censored, which is kind of nice. This concludes our look at non-horror pre-code films. Again, if you like what you're hearing, please hit like, comment, subscribe. If you don't like what you're hearing, please give me a comment. Let me know. Thank you.